Hmm?
Five.
We are live.
Think so.
Let's hope so. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of Mahone Bay Town Council. This is our second meeting for the month of October. And we will begin by acknowledging that we are gathered tonight in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral, present, and future territory of the Mi'kmaq people. Tonight, we gather with the intent followed by the living peace and friendship treaties, and we do so with respect, cooperation, and coexistence. And welcome to those of you at home who are joining us on our YouTube connection. There will be an opportunity at the end of the regularly scheduled council agenda for those of you who may be watching from home to ask a question about any topic that is discussed tonight. I would also note that it's possible, if you desire, to make a statement or have a question for council through the public input session. We do not have any scheduled for tonight, but if you would like to do so at the next council meeting, call town hall and speak with staff, and they will make the necessary arrangements for you to do that. Call the meeting to order. You have an agenda that was emailed out to you. And what is your wish with the agenda?
Your worship, I'd like to move that the agenda be accepted as circulated with an amendment, which would be to move agenda items 6.10 and 8.2 further ahead in the agenda to accommodate the people who are going to be presenting.
Okay. So we'll have the two presentations. The first one is on extended producer responsibilities. And the second one relates to the report of the Planning Advisory Committee, in particular with respect to the new municipal planning strategy, as well as the proposed draft land use bylaw. Okay, on the question.
Second that.
You'll second that. On the question, all in favor? The motion is carried. We'll, somebody's probably heard an echo. Eric, you're not on mute, are you?
It's me who was joining.
Hmm?
It was me who was joining. That's one question.
Okay. All right. Let's go to the minutes of the regular council meeting of October 10th. Council members, what would you like to do with that? Suzanne?
I'll move that we-
Councilwoman Sprott?
I move that we accept the minutes as presented.
Thank you. Seconded by Councillor Now. On the question, all in favor? That motion is carried. There's nothing for the public input session. Under 4 for presentations, I think we could go to our the discussion on EPR. Gabe, if you're ready to.
So I should say, we didn't ask Gabe here to present his report, but to answer questions in relation to reports. I don't want to make him feel too much. So we have a report in the package from Gabe. I'm sure everybody's already read it. And it does have a recommendation there concerning opting into the EPR program. And if anyone has any questions, it's great that we have Gabe here from MJSB, so I don't have to field them. Does anyone have any questions?
Gabe, you spoke to this item well at the Joint Services Board about the virtues of opting in and why opting in now seems like the most prudent decision. Maybe you could just speak to that, your thoughts about why opting in seems like the right thing to do and for everybody's benefit.
Okay. So at this point, it doesn't seem like, there's a lot of downside to opting into this. Basically, it's a non-binding, it's a expression of intent to participate in the program. It's non-binding, we can still opt out at a later date if we choose to, but we, reserve a seat at the table right now to provide our feedback on the coming changes to the waste collection, world. And it allows us a chance to, ask questions and voice any concerns and kind of shape that future for the town of Mountain Bay. If we opt out now, it would basically be saying we're gonna kind of continue things as it's been going on, and you're missing out on the potential to get some revenue from this new program. If anybody does have any questions regarding specific items in the staff report, I'm happy to answer them.
Councillor Wilson.
Yeah, Gary Kelly Wilson here. With Matt. A former councillor, a friend of mine locally, used to own the local paper. And she was absolutely dead set against this whole notion because of the costs that would be transferred back to industry. And newspapers only being one of them, I'm sure there's a long list. Is that fear a real fear? And if so, should we care?
They did address that in the NSFM meetings a little bit. So the reports that we are getting is that the costs are already being transferred, like you're already seeing it at the grocery stores, you're already seeing it everywhere because they have introduced EPR in other regions of Canada. And there was some great documentation. I think it might even be in the PowerPoint that was sent out as part of that package that kind of showed some of the costs in municipalities that have adopted EPR versus municipalities that haven't. So we're not expecting to see a lot of costs transferred back to industry or the taxpayers at the store level. So.
All right, thanks.
Councillor Owens Croft, then Councillor Carver.
Non-councillor Rose Brock. Nice to meet you. I'm wondering how this will affect employees of our waste management center here locally, like well as the reduction in jobs and.
We don't anticipate that. It's not fully clear yet exactly how everything is going to shape out. I mean, that's what the 2-year consultation process is going to kind of shape. We still will be responsible for like any ICI or facility waste collection, so that will likely not change what's coming to our site. There's a possibility that down the road there may be a more centralized site that would eliminate the need for transfer stations and affect it here, but nothing is fully certain or laid out on yet. So the hope is that it wouldn't have an effect on the waste site employees.
Councillor Carver.
Thanks. Gabe, I just have a question about the waste, the material management standard and section 5 that says material that meets any of the following conditions shall not be accounted for in respect of a producer's management requirement for a material category. That it lists a bunch of things that include items that might be used for land cover, or it's something that's supplied to an incinerator for incineration, or that is landfilled or land disposed. But what kinds of things are those going to be? I mean, it just seems like a lot of things.
Well, I mean, the new program that's coming in is strictly for plastic and paper packaging, right? So there's certain things that there aren't market for from social recycling or any of the other facilities like that that currently under the setup do end up in the landfill. So it's kind of, they're looking to bring an EPR in for this. They're also talking about for a few other products as well. And they've reached out to industry for consultation on what other items could fall under this. So it's
So that's down the road.
Yes.
So, well, if we sign up, the understanding is that we can back out at any time if we aren't happy with the conditions.
That's
Okay.
our understanding. We will see, I think you will see through EPR and implementation of province-wide standard for what's going or what's recyclable and what's still going to landfill, because right now we don't have that. It varies by region. For example, most of our products can recycle styrofoam. They do accept styrofoam at social recycling, but here in our region, it still ends up in the landfill. So we're gonna see a change there and lots of other items.
Deputy Mayor? No? Councilor now.
Thanks.
Well, if there are no other questions, we have a recommended action. The opening paragraph of the first paper in that set. If somebody would like to make a motion.
Can we make you guys read to the end? Okay, put it right in the first sentence.
Get it out of the way early.
David?
Sorry, Deputy Mayor.
I'd like to move that we direct NSJSB to work with municipal staff to ensure that opt-in submission requirements have been met prior to January 2024 deadline. I didn't read the rest of it, I just thought that.
Okay,
Yeah, I think we probably need the first part too.
So, to move that it says each of the NSJSB
The town approved, the standard approved.
that the town approves. Well, it doesn't make sense to me, but I'll read it. That each of the MJSP partner municipalities approve opting into the EPR for packaging, PPP, and direct MJSP to work with municipal staff to ensure the opt-in submission requirements have been met prior to January 1st, 2024.
okay. Seconded, Councillor Now. You've heard the motion duly seconded. On the question, all in favor? Thank you. It's a long time.
Yeah.
Years.
I've heard that.
Yeah, it's been-
On it.
Okay,
Thanks.
any other questions for Gabe?
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks for your time, everyone.
Okay. I think we would, if with council's agreement, we'll go to the report from the Planning Advisory Committee, which includes the report from Upland, as well as this particular package includes the draft of the municipal planning strategy and the land use bylaw. Welcome, Ian.
Thank you.
We should make him an honorary councillor.
Fair enough.
Last 2 years, we spent one time.
So I just want to come to the report of the committee. I guess technically it's deputy mayor who's presenting this report, and you're free to turn it over to him whenever you want to, but.
Yeah, I mean, I believe most of council members were at the last PSC meeting. I think it's only a couple who are not. And we, the meeting went well. I guess the draft documents were well received. There was a few suggestions, and I think we have some recommended motions here, but I'd let Ian speak to or add to the report if there's anything to add.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Good evening, everyone. So yeah, it was a good PAC meeting rather, and PAC directed 3 changes, which are reflected in the draft that's attached to the agenda tonight. clarity around not permitting accessory dwellings as short-term rentals, a correction to the roof pitch in the architectural control area, and then kind of the major change, or the most substantial change, I guess, was changing PID 6048194, which is the triangular lot between over near Y Street, the intersection of the two trails, changing that from general residential to multi-unit residential at the request of the property owner. There was one other item that PAC discussed, and that was PID 606023115, which is a large parcel just on the north side of the Dynamite Trail. It doesn't have frontage on any roads. And there's a existing permit application for a psychology clinic there. And so there was discussion at PAC of how to accommodate that. And what came out of that discussion was the suggestion of including that portion of the property where the clinic is proposed in the institutional zone. And the direction from PAC was for staff to go back and check with the property owner and confirm that that was a-okay. So Heather did that, got the okay from the property owner, and they provided us a map showing us the exact boundaries of where they were intending to have this use. So we have a recommended motion there to direct us to make that change to the draft. And that is included on page 2 of your report.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions?
So this last one was at the intersection of the Dynamite Trail.
Yes. Or sorry, not the trail itself, but the property is just on the north side of the trail. It's northwest corner of the town. And so it would be a small portion of that property would be moved from the unserviced zone to the institutional zone to accommodate the proposal.
And that property is actually accessed off of Y Street, not Long Couch. If anybody's-
By the old station,
Yeah.
the old station.
Station, okay.
Now I know what we're talking about.
Down there by the big rock. Okay. Deputy Mayor?
Yeah, if there's no questions, I guess, there is a motion here that that council give first reading to the new land use bylaw as amended. So I'd like to move that.
Thank you.
Second that.
Councillor Feeney? Okay, it's been moved and seconded. On the question.
And just for clarity, is it okay if we insert the content of the amendment from the previous motion? We can put it into one motion, but we should just say as amended to include PID that in the institutional zone. We can still put it into the same
Okay.
motion, if that's okay with the mover and seconder. You just said as amended, Deputy Mayor, and I just thought we should say what the amendment was in the motion.
Yeah, but it was more than one amendment, right?
So there's only one to you, Deputy Mayor, all the other amendments were made and are reflected already in the draft. So the only one that this council, I think, specifically needs to direct us would be in relation to that property. And there's a separate motion for that on page 2.
To place a portion of PID 606023115 in the institutional zone as depicted in the staff report to council dated October 26, 2023. So you could just add that into that motion. It doesn't have to be a separate motion. If the mover and seconder. agree.
As said.
Okay, fair enough.
First reading, right?
Yeah, give first reading to land use bylaw with that amendment on the institutional zone.
And schedule a public hearing.
Mover's
Yes,
okay,
and
the
schedule a
seconder's
public
okay
hearing.
with the minor adjustment. On the motion, on the question, all in favor? Motion is carried. Before we go on, Mr. Hyde, what does the fact that council has approved the first reading, what does that mean to the citizens?
So, well, it means a couple of things. It means that the drafts will be made available for public review and then we'll be advertising the public hearing date, which I thought we'd probably decide to confirm the date right after the next motion here, or we could do it now.
Okay,
And then it also means that, and Ian, feel free to correct me on this, but from this point onwards, any applications received would have to be in alignment with both the current and new bylaws until the new bylaws would receive second reading and be confirmed. So I guess those are the two things that happen as of First reading.
So there will be a public, these documents will be available to the public. There will be a meeting scheduled and the public will be invited to come in and concerns or
Support or.
tell us what a great
Tell us
job
what they
they've
think,
done. A great job that Ian has done with his crew, but they will definitely have that opportunity. Okay,
I just, a question for the CAO, if I may.
yes, please.
Making copies of the documents available to the public, would that be in hard copy too, if people wish?
I think that's usually what we've done. I'm gonna look over at Eric for that because logistically it would be Eric and Kelly would probably make sure that happens, but yeah, we've had some.
If requested, it would be no problem.
Hopefully an electronic copy would suffice only for the size of the document.
Exactly, yeah.
So Dylan, you're thinking,
Point.
okay, I guess we have this motion. So we're thinking some public consultation or between now and the second reading sometime early December. Is that your?
Yeah, so I mean, we can jump into the date. So what we had talked about was at PAC, we talked about the possibility of using the PAC meeting date, which would be Tuesday, December 5th, that evening. Does that still work for you?
It does work for me, and if I could just chime in, one key thing is that only counselors who are present at the public hearing may vote on second reading.
So it would, if we did it on the 5th, then we would have second reading scheduled to take place at the regular meeting of council on the 12th of December.
Yeah. Okay.
Could you ask the CAO to repeat that?
Would you repeat that?
Yeah, you get a lot of engine noise. So we have the hearing up at the fire station on the 5th, the evening of December 5th.
Right.
And then a week later, we'd have a regular council
Okay.
meeting here, and that's where second reading would be on. the
We would
agenda.
vote
On the
second.
agenda, right, thank you.
Just a point that with using the fire hall, that's fire department practice night, so it might, a little bit.
Oh, see, I'm always thinking of the third one for your meeting, but you got.
We're
practice
actually meaning
meeting.
the first one's for the
Oh, okay,
practice.
well,
So the
it's always better to use the fire station, but we could probably use the Legion.
I'm just saying, that might interfere as far as noise and stuff goes. Depending what they're doing.
Well, we will advertise it, but if you're watching, the plan has been for the 5th. And well, sorry about that, Richard, but we will certainly make sure it's clear where it is happening.
Yeah.
No, I
And
just want
there'll
to
be
say,
lots of
I'm not saying
those-
it's gonna be a problem.
I'll check with Adam first.
Background,
Yeah.
noise and stuff.
But the documentation will be available through town hall. Any suggestion as to when that would begin?
So the advertisement, I think, won't go out until, now that it's Thursday night. The advertisement won't go out until the week after next, but we'll probably have it available next week. When the advertisement goes out, it says it's now available at town hall and that, but if somebody's watching this and they came in sooner, the drafts are available electronically already. So yeah, we'll make sure that's the case.
Thank you. All right, and there's a second motion there.
This one with respect to the planning strip.
Yes, the MPS. Councillor Carver?
The resolve that council for the town of Mahone Bay give first reading to and schedule a public hearing regarding the proposed municipal planning strategy and land use bylaw attached to the council agenda of October 26, 2023.
Thank you. Seconded by the deputy mayor. You've heard the motion, duly seconded. On the question. All in favor? Kelly, was that? No. Gotcha. We're just a scratch. Okay,
Past us 2.5 years.
Ian, any other comments?
No, this is an exciting step. I'll make the edit for the, that zoning change and get you the updated document. So that can be, and we'll update the project website, but we'll see what people have to say. So
We'll see you back here yet again. and-
Yeah. 2 more times.
I think it's fair to suggest that citizens are encouraged as much as they are able to prepare to read through the documentation and to offer their comments, because this document's going to be around for 10 years plus before there's going to be a change in it.
Yeah, the
So,
last time was 2008.
that's right, that's right. And little did anyone know at that time that it was gonna linger as long as it did. Okay. Thank you, Ian.
Thank you. I'll bring some things on the 12th.
Okay. So let's go back to correspondence. What is your wish, council?
Your worship,
Yes, please.
I would like to speak to item 5.1. Which is a letter from Ellen Johnson, the Regional Accessibility Coordinator. And in her letter, she has notified us that the Lunenburg County Accessibility Nominating Committee, comprised of the mayors and wardens of the 5 Lunenburg County municipalities, have recommended an appointment person to fill the vacancy on the Accessibility Advisory Committee.
Mhm.
And I would like to recommend that, I would like to move that the councillor for the town of Mahone Bay confirm the appointment of Scott Lutz to the Lunenburg County Accessibility Advisory Committee for a term of 2 years.
Thank you.
I'll second that.
Seconded by Councillor Lawrence Croft. You heard the motion. On the question, all in favor? Motion is carried. Congratulations to Mr. Lutz. I'm sure Scott will be well up for the task. Okay. Let's go the other items, 5.2 or 5.3. What is your wish, Councillor Wilson?
Move to receive and file.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Now. Motion to receive and file those other 2 correspondence items. On the question, all in favor? Motion is carried. Staff reports to council. It's the end of the month, CAO.
It's indeed 41 pages. Much of it, as always, repeats, but there's some new stuff in there, some updates. So if anybody has any questions on the report to council, I'm happy to take them.
Councillor Carver.
Well, I did have a question for CAO, which was about the new painting, the yellow lines on Pleasant, but just because they're new. And I think I could figure out why they're there, but I wonder if the explanation could be given briefly for people, for the public who might be watching. That's a fair question.
Yeah, I think so. So I guess I'll give a little bit of the history to it. So it was initially tee up of Pleasant Street has been something council's been talking about for quite some time. Originally, there was a discussion about possibly imposing stop controls there, and then we eventually decided just to go with the tee up. Last February, we had a recommendation come forward to council that we'd go with the tee up. Now that's gone to engineers, but in the little sketch that was provided and the description that was provided at the time, one of the things that was recommended was extending no parking zones around the crosswalks and around the intersection to ensure clear lines of visibility. So right off the bat, there was a need to do that. I think, you know, there's the visibility consideration for both pedestrians and motorists. There's also currently, just with the current configuration, when you turn onto the street, often an issue with vehicles being parked, you know, where you would naturally turn onto the street, which forces vehicles further out, which then creates a possible safety issue with vehicles coming down Pleasant. But, you know, all of that is to say, council's also approved this reconfiguration, which is going to reduce the crossing distance so that we don't have 3 lanes of width there at the opening. We're just going to have 2. And so that parking along there would be restricted as a part of those changes. There'll be presumably a little bit of change to the concrete curb there as well. We're still waiting on the engineers' final designs to get that tendered to take place early next year. So right away, there is, I think, some immediate safety improvement as a result of extending that area, but it's also to prepare for the fact that the curb will be bumped out and that will further necessitate that parking restriction. So that's the answer that we got. And people can stay tuned if they're curious for the final designs from the engineers. But it's intended to reduce the crossing distance and improve visibility.
Okay. Do you see that as something that other intersections will be reviewed? As a possibility? to
This one
extending
came out in a couple of the transportation reviews that have been done. And the reason was that it's pretty unusual in town for having the extra lane width there. We kind of have the opposite problem in a lot of the other intersections, like if you think of Fairmont, you know, you have too little space there on the corner. So, you know, the recommendation that was given with respect to Fairmont was to consider making it a one-way street. But those type of considerations are all just in the advice we've received from engineers over the years. Status, we have nothing else planned for any of the intersections with Main.
All right. Any other questions for CAO? Councilor Owens Crawl.
I've got a couple here, 6.4, about the short-term rentals. And I understand privacy, but not sharing registration information, like if one neighbor wants to know if their neighbors.
So this was just questions on 6.1.
I thought he was ready to move on when he said ask that question.
We're still talking.
Oh,
just transport.
Oh. Well,
But we'll get there.
Yeah.
okay.
No, nothing?
I did want to note the water loss statistics show some significant improvement. And that would only reflect the leaks that were fixed in the first quarter, so we'll still see, according to Scott, some further improvement in the next quarter. It's good to see.
That's good news.
Councilor King.
Dylan, with regard to the capital projects and specifically the Fairmont Street initiative, I knew there was, there's a lot of balls in the air on that. Are we, given the time of the year, is that likely to be deferred till next fiscal year?
So Fairmont, we're only going to do engineering this year. And that's all that is planned. So I'm still expecting to get the engineering tender for Maine for the big project closes next week. And we've had a lot of interest. And we've learned some stuff in the course of that one. So the Fairmont one, I'm intending to publish basically as that one closes. And that will be open for the next 4 weeks, closing before the holidays. And then that work would take place prior to budget. So by the time we get to budget, we'd have the concept designs ready to go out to market for construction, but we wouldn't be going out to market for construction until next year.
Gotcha, okay.
Now, there has been something raised in that, and since you've asked, I'll bring it up. With our asset management data, we're looking at the water lines there. I got to having a conversation with Scott, and the water line under that particular section from we're talking about like only Pleasant Street up to the bottom of the hill where Pine Grove branches off. So only that block and a bit, that water line is all original cast iron, whereas all the other water lines in the neighborhood were done later. So there are quite a history of issues on that line. And even though the work wasn't going to see a full replacement of the water line, Scott's suggestion is that we include it in the scope of contemplation so that at least we get the engineers to look at that and give council cost estimates so we can make a better decision. Because if we're going to do stormwater work there, and if we're going to repave the street, and both of those were part of the plan, it does stand to reason that we would do the water. So yeah, all the rest of that neighborhood water is fairly recent and in fairly good condition, but that particular strip on Fairmont is original.
There's been some issues on a couple of houses on that street that have been constantly yellow water.
You guys, right?
Yeah, two on the end that got by Pine Grove. They're both constantly got dirty water. They can't do wash, they can't use it for a bath or anything because it's been so dirty. And the water guys are trying to figure out why, but maybe replacement of those old pipes might be the solution.
Yeah, there's a couple of valves in that area that Scott would like to see replaced at the same time. And it's only worth finding out what it will cost and then making a decision. Ultimately, that'll end up being a budget decision for council for next year. But yeah, initially this project, of course, you'll recall, started from stormwater and road condition. And it was only later that Scott got into the conversation and identified these issues as well. But I'm glad we didn't miss it. And we'll just, I guess, long answer, Joe, we'll have a lot more info by budget. but we're only spending what was intended to be the engineering portion of the budget for the project this year.
I think there was complete consensus by the council in June and July through the budget process that the Fairmont Street, improvements would be prioritized. In fact, we even made a conscious decision to defer the $250,000 worth of paving work on Fogo Road, specifically so that we'd have funding to prioritize the Fairmont Street work. So when I looked at the Fairmont Street work and saw that it hadn't started yet, it was like, well, we really made two decisions. One, to reallocate funding that was worthwhile to do on Fogo Road, but we've just deferred it to do Fairmont. Fair enough. I think that's a good idea. But we may be looking, based on the timing now, of going another summer without any road work on Fogo Road, and if we can live with that, fine. Like that we'll talk about it next June. I think we should just get our minds around the fact that we should be probably communicating that to some people who may be under the impression that we're doing a big Fogo Road project next May.
Yeah, there's a couple things to note on that. I mean, obviously, you're right, we discussed your budget. We did do first off some work. That Councilor Carver, we talked about during the budget process, and that is done, and it seems to be a pretty good improvement there. But the second thing is that the project was to chip seal the whole street, so that is actually something that is, it's a very straightforward project. It doesn't require engineering.
Shovel already,
Yeah, so I mean, it's still up to council, but like, unlike the Fairmont Street work that has a fair bit of engineering involved, we would be able to do it the same year that the project is approved.
Yeah, fair enough.
So it's gonna be up to council. We could conceivably do both of them next year. That'll be up to Mike. And just a quick note on the money, which I think is a positive. We're concluding the pilot that we've been undertaking for the last 4 years with respect to the waste treatment facility and the use of peracetic acid. It'll be officially concluded by December, just in time then to be eligible to go back to PCAP, the Provincial Capital Assistance Program, which funded that project, tasked to see if we can get some money towards the Fairmont Street improvement. So I think it's a good opportunity as well to take the engineered Fairmont Street project and float it up to the Provincial Capital Assistance Program and maybe get as much as $100,000 there. And that might make the decision about chip sealing Coburg a little bit easier. So that timing should work out, and we'll just keep everybody posted by budget. We should know a lot more.
Good choice of words.
And I just got kicked out of the Zoom meeting. I assume it's still working for everybody else.
I'm still
I got a little bit confused about chip sealing.
I'm here.
Former.
So the project that was recommended that was deferred into next year in the capital investment plan, so it doesn't mean it's an absolute done deal.
Yeah.
But the recommendation of Jonathan was to do a chip seal of Coburg. So that's the same thing that was done on Clearland Road now 4 years ago. It's a different thing from gravel chip seal, which I also have a lot of skepticism about.
Yeah.
But no, this is a more proven method, and we have used it before. And it is commonly used by highways, and I think for a road like Coburg, I would support Jonathan's recommendation on that. But we can have a little opportunity in budget to make sure everybody has some level of confidence. And I think when we go out to market, we will want to consider who's being hired to do that work and whether they have experience doing chip seal projects.
Okay. Any other questions?
A lot of stars now in the report.
Yeah, well, and we're only halfway through the year, so.
Anyone wish to make a motion to receive the report for information? So moved, Councilor Carver, thank you. Do we have a seconder? Councilor Wilson? On the question, all in favor? Thank you. Okay, let's go to the staff report 6.2, Saucor Regional Library appointments.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. So this has been an outstanding item for a long time, and when it came up to the last meeting, council had a good discussion about it and then agreed to defer it to this meeting. And the thought was that that would allow for some time. I believe Councilor Ronastrop was going to follow up. If you haven't had the opportunity, we could always defer it again, but otherwise maybe you want to speak to this item.
I don't know if the applicant that I know of has presented the form to.
Okay, so you spoke to somebody, but they.
On the library staff?
Not that we've heard at this
Okay,
point.
well, then I'll check into that. Because I did drop off an application form to a person who's came to visit me on the recommendation from one of the librarians. on the bookmobile, so, and they did reach out to a couple of other people.
So I guess it's council's prerogative if we were to do anything else.
So I think we should advertise. And then, so because I think we talked about the concern around if Councilor Lawrence Croft will be going to reach out and try to encourage folks, that it's also open to everyone else.
Yeah.
And so since she's done that step, I think a second motion, but we direct staff to advertise should be what we're going with. So that when that comes,
Okay.
it will be part of,
Mhm.
I guess I call it at least, we've not had lots of people banging down the doors, but hopefully it will. Yeah,
Right.
yeah. So I'd like to move that council direct staff to advertise for a member of the public to represent Mahone Bay on the South Shore Regional Library Board.
Seconded by Councillor Wilson. You heard the motion duly seconded on the question. All in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Let's go to the staff report on development services quarterly reporting.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So it had been a request back in the spring to see if we could provide quarterly reports from the Development Services Municipality of Chester. And it took them a little while getting into the year to get their reporting up for their own year, but this is the first, this is the second quarter, but it's the first quarter in which we're receiving the reports. And we should be receiving these reports hereafter. I provided a little summary of how the information would be captured in the report to council. So that is generally something that will always be there. So it doesn't matter if somebody's catching the exact meeting at which the quarterly reports would be presented. If there's a report to council on there and it's the full one, it'll be in there for whatever the most current quarter was. And it captures most of the information that was provided, but not all. So there's a little more in the full reports. And I did note as well that I had a conversation about adding building permit value, because I feel that's a very valuable part of the reporting. And they did think they could do that, but not necessarily going back to the last 2 quarters. So we may see that in Q3. But if anybody has any questions, otherwise the report is just presented for information.
Councilor Scott.
Is it possible to find out how many they turned down? Is that a,
Development applications received versus development applications processed, yeah, probably. They're really mostly withdrawn. I mean, I wouldn't say. I don't
well,
know
then
that they
could we
turned
say
down
withdrawn?
It would just be the total number received versus the total number that are approved, and then
Yes.
people can draw their own conclusions. I guess I'll ask about that one. Yeah, I can certainly check in on that. They should have that information.
I mean, is that a thing that they're turned down? As opposed to withdrawn?
I mean, people find out that their application is not going to be accepted, and, then I guess that's an application that was turned down. Often they're amended into a way that they can be accepted, but, sometimes it's just simply, this isn't gonna be allowable under the bylaws. It's really more of a question at that point, and the answer is no, but. Somebody might not ask the question, they might just submit the request, and then the answer just might be no, especially with a change of use. Because people don't always realize what use is permitted under their zone, and it may just be a simple no answer.
Well, and also, sometimes people question, how did they ever get a permit, right? And it would be nice to know once in a while that, sometimes ideas come forward that are not acceptable in our land bylaw use or whatnot. It's be interesting just to see if any are turned down.
Yeah, I'm sure, I think most of the ideas, people are used to just raising the heather conversationally, and then, usually don't get to this state of applying, but I'll ask what we could do in that regard. It's a good question.
Councillor Kerr.
So is it possible to have more information about the type of project under building permits or development permits? I mean, is it,
Jack,
am I missing something?
It has a list of different kinds of things.
Oh, maybe, there they are down there, right, okay. Addition, construction, review. Apartments, residential. That's by district. By
Well,
building
no,
type.
the
Okay,
district,
there
yeah,
it is,
we
yeah.
are a
Oh,
district, we're just one district.
I didn't
Because the
see
way
that.
this report is generated, Mahone Bay is one of the districts that Chester administers.
Mhm.
So they can also run a report off for each of the districts of the municipality of Chester. So we are one district for the purposes of this reporting.
Okay, so there, that is the information that I was asking about.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, I didn't see that.
Yeah, DEC has its own category because it's a common request.
Yeah, I didn't see that when I.
So that's the level of detail that will be
Yeah,
on
that's
the
not-
quarterly. And then if you happen to catch it in between those, then the abbreviated version up on the front thing, that's what will be in
Okay.
the report to council.
Well, that's great, thank you. And it does give a sense of the type of building that's happening.
Yes. And thank the staff for doing this.
Yeah, I'll pass that along.
Move
Does somebody want to move to accept it for information?
that we accept it for information, thank you.
Thank you.
I'll second
Seconded
that.
by Councillor Lawrence Croft. You heard the motion on the question. All in favor? Motion is carried. Let's go to short-term rentals.
Thank you. So this is the one that Suzanne had a question for, but essentially this is, Eric has put together the background as to what is going to be needed for us to be able to get access to information about the short-term rental registry, and it has a lot of strings attached, I think, in terms of how the information is used, and that's outlined here. But ultimately, what we're looking for is a motion. The council enter into the information sharing agreement with the province, and happy to take any questions.
Councillor Feeney.
So Mayor, I think we should enter into the agreement for and extract the information. I think Councillor Lonis Croft had an interesting question. I think that kind of jumps off the page about gaining information from that source versus having access to information from internal sources that we already would have in-house. And so I think as we've talked about short-term accommodations through the land use bylaw, and we have, you know, a dozen odd short-term accommodations now already in place who in some form or fashion have registered with the town and through the planning process. That's my understanding. So look, I think the point is like this information source is not our only information source. And although they're likely to be almost identical, like I think there would be, in order to avail of some of the benefits of the land use bylaw, you're also going to have had to register and provide information to the town. So while I view this as somewhat problematic as far as the lack of ability to use all the information, I think that the council and the staff of the town is certainly going to be privy to all of the relevant information from our internal reporting requirements. So I think it's great, but you know, the fact that we may not be able to get information from this source doesn't mean we can't get it from another source.
Yeah.
At least that's sort of my thoughts.
Yeah, I think you're correct in that, but the distinction really is here that in Mahone Bay, and particularly according to the new drafts that have just been given first reading, any use in the commercial zone or any use that will have become grandfathered with respect to pre-approved uses in the residential zone predating tonight, those will all be uses registered through development permit with the town. And so the knowledge as to those uses is something that we have for that reason, and it would be disclosed only in the manner in which we would disclose it for that reason.
Fair enough.
But it's not quite as restrictive as this.
Right.
And then this would also add to that information about the individual who in a residential zone is the owner occupier and has temporarily listed their property. And so I think it's appropriate that in those cases where no change of use is required, that information would be held to a different standard, and it will be, because it will only be known to us through this registry. But that's properties where the use remains residential and they're owner occupied, and really all you're saying is, hey, that person's away for a few weeks, and that's really not anybody's business.
Yeah.
So I think it's kind of appropriate that actually isn't something that would be known to us through a change of
Yeah,
use.
no, fair
So, you know, yes, you're correct, and that's the distinction.
And I think we're going to talk a little bit about that nuance when we get to the marketing levy. And about the virtue, yeah, fair enough,
Yeah,
okay,
if not on this tonight's report, we could,
yeah.
but also subsequently when we get to the draft. I would
Fair
like that. So in this case, the
So-
recommendation, as we said, that we enter into a judicial sharing agreement.
Maybe just, Saul, why don't I just kick it off by providing motion that council enter into the information sharing agreement with the province of Nova Scotia.
Thank you. Seconded by Councillor Carver. On the motion, on the question, all in favor, motion is carried. Okay. Then let's go to the marketing levy.
Closely interrelated. So we have another report prepared by Eric. This follows on the recent mayor's forums meeting. The discussion around levies has been going on at that level in Lunenburg County for a very long time, far before short-term rentals was on the horizon. At the time, it had been thought of as something that would apply only to large accommodations, more than 10 or more than 20. But essentially, because of the creation of the short-term registry, the province has come forward with a new form of marketing levy legislation. It's no longer done by private members' bill for a specific community, setting a threshold of how many units would be affected. Now it would affect all night stays, I guess is the term, whether they're in a hotel, whether they're in an Airbnb, whether they're in a conventional bed and breakfast. The purpose of establishing the registry that we just spoke about is so that all of those night stays are all treated in the same manner with respect to levies. And therefore, it is now possible for municipalities to establish a levy by bylaw. And the consensus amongst county councils in the county is that we should all do that if any of us are going to do that. And the purpose of the levies would be to establish a small funding stream to support marketing and promotion of the local area and increase visitation. That could be done through existing organizations there's a Events Lunenburg County, the Social Tourism Cooperative, local chambers of commerce, the towns and municipalities ourselves, provide visitor supporting services. All of that stuff is yet to be determined. But what has been determined is that we should all have the same level of marketing levy so as to create a fair playing field throughout the council. And that's why the only thing in here in terms of the scope of the proposed bylaw at this point is that it would be at a 3% charge. That's a consistent charge that would be applied to the county. And then the scope of the bylaw will look at more situational exemptions and how this would be applied, enforcement. And that's where I would suggest we will want to talk about how it will be applied to your registered short-term rental use properties. So those are those ones in the commercial zone or grandfathered outside of the commercial zone. And then how it would apply to an individual who lives in a home and is temporarily renting it. We may want to treat them differently for reasons having to do with the difficulty of administration and enforcement and whether it's worth it to apply the levy consistently. But those are conversations I assume we'll have when staff bring forward a draft bylaw, if we're directed to do that tonight. And if council wants to have discussion before that, obviously, alternatively, you could refer this to policy and strategy for a discussion before having a draft bylaw. And sometimes councils prefer to have discussion before having a draft, and sometimes you prefer to have a draft and then use that as the basis for your discussion. So we're putting it right to, we recommend a draft, but obviously feel free to take the other step first if you think that would be more appropriate.
So when you, CAO, when you referred to there being a consensus amongst councils, were you referring to the mayors and deputies, mayors, wardens and deputies meeting?
Just that everyone at that meeting agreed that if we're going to impose a levy, the thing to do would all be to be at the same level so as to create a fair playing field. Yeah.
So that's where the consensus was. It wasn't that all the councils said.
No. I think most councils have yet to discuss draft bylaws.
And
So how do we reflect that in a motion? If council directs staff to draft a marketing bylaw, how does that?
Well, we've just indicated that the draft is going to include that 3%.
It would include all that.
Section, yeah.
Okay.
And then council could still discuss that in the draft, but at this point, we'd be including it in the draft unless we're very.
So
Deputy Mayor,
I specifically have nothing against the marketing levy. But one of the assumptions is that what as a community, we are struggling with, as communities in the South Shore, we are struggling with is marketing of this area for tourism purposes. And I would say probably that's not necessarily this what we need. We probably, from my perspective, need to have a whole, I guess, wholesale kind of approach whereby we actually managing the tourism that's coming in so that the impacts of the tourism, we want it, but we're not really managing. We're just saying, well, you come and we'll figure things out. I remember the other day we had a conversation about when the Scarecrow Festival grew too big, it had some negative impacts on the community. And so how do we, if we're going to attract and promote Mahone Bay to have more tourists, there has to be on the back end a thinking or a management of how that tourism is impacting residents here. And so that would be my focus rather than wanting to get as much money to continue promoting Mahone Bay. And from that particular, I guess, perspective, I'd rather we discuss this as policy and strategy so that at least we have, before we jump to a draft, at least we are in line and in sync as to why we want to charge accommodations normally so that we can promote.
Oh, yeah, no, it all makes more sense. I mean, it's easy to say, you know, spend this on marketing, but Lunenburg County is already the most marketed, arguably. around, so, yeah. No, that's a good point. And the draft bylaw put forward by MODL doesn't specify where the money would go. But I do understand the desire to have that conversation at least in line with the drafting of a bylaw. Even if we go with the bylaw that doesn't say where the money will go, you wouldn't really want to impose a bylaw without knowing where the money will go. So, okay, do you want to make that motion?
Yeah, I'd like to move that that council puts this on the policy and strategy committee's agenda. Do I have to specify what?
Well, I know I missed the meeting on Monday night. I know you guys already went through a process of putting some things on that agenda.
Yeah.
So I guess we can let it be determined at the next policy and strategy where it will fit, unless you want to say it's on the next agenda, in which case you'd have to say
So
that.
then for the motion, I was put for a future meeting of the policy and strategy.
Okay. Seconded, Councillor Wilson. On the question, all in favor? Motion is carried.
The comfort center cost avoidance. But levy, so we're called.
Yeah, once we've got all those people to come here, we're gonna go to that.
Fair enough.
Okay. All right. Solar garden project update.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It seems like we're never not getting a project update of some kind.
Some kind, yeah.
But this one is much more operational, knowing that we had a financial update from area and a quarterly update from area at our last meeting. This one focuses on the fact that recently going through the tour of the facility with the electric utility staff, the focus of that conversation was on preparing for the handover of the facility from the contractor, which is not that far off. And we've had a few things we've talked about, you know, when we approach that time, which is, as I say, is getting sooner and sooner, probably later in November. And the things we had talked about were holding a third open house to essentially announce that the project had reached production. And that it won't be completed until spring when we have a chance to put it into long-term financing and get all the claims paid back by the federal government. But it will be in production within the next 2 weeks. So probably next week it will be into production. And so we want to schedule an open house. We did have some conversation this morning at a meeting in Berwick about the date of that open house. So I've presented it here with a recommendation for Monday, November 20th. It was suggested that that be pushed a couple of weeks further, not too close to the Christmas holidays, of course, but just to allow for time to prepare better for the event. Berwick has one coming up as well. And then the other recommendation here having to do with entering production is that while the project remains in its construction phase and won't be completed until spring, it's still producing energy, and that energy is going on to the town's grid. And when it does that, it displaces energy that we would have had to purchase from Nova Scotia Power, which is great news because this energy is 100% renewable and that energy was not. And so people can feel good about the fact that our grid will be getting cleaner as of next week, a substantial amount cleaner. But we also need to determine how the town is compensated by the utility for that energy. And the proposal here is that until we reach the completion of the project, that energy should be compensated at the same rate that we would have been paying for Nova Scotia Power. which essentially means that the utility will pay the town, that will be considered as part of the project financing costs, payback costs to the town. So the recommendation here is that we direct staff to hold a third open house. I'm now recommending it not be set sooner than the first week of December. And also the council set the interim purchase price for energy from the solar garden equivalent to the avoided cost of purchasing from NSPI until a long-term power purchase agreement can be signed, which would be anticipated in the spring. So those are the recommendations. This morning, we talked about the possibility of holding that open house on December 4th. The only issue with that is we just tonight talked about having the plan home base session on the 5th. So we might be better served to look to the 11th, the following Monday, or the 11th of December, the following Monday for the solar open house.
Okay.
That's just a suggestion, but I'm thinking around the bingo schedule and the meeting schedule for the fire department.
Yeah, I'm thinking, I mean, you're right into Christmas season then, and it's, I don't know how best to play it, other than making it a Christmas party. Which, I mean, if we think about it, maybe it's possible. But maybe I would like to see the motion amended to include reference to a Q&A session as part of the open house, so that it would be open house and Q&A session for the solar garden project, whatever it's, I'm saying that I'd like to see that as part of the motion. When we get to
motion?
it.
Well, you could make the motion.
I could make the motion, so I'm not quite sure, you'll have to fill in for the dates. That I will move the council direct staff to work with area. Are they going to work with area?
Yeah.
Yeah, to work with area in planning a third open house for the solar garden that will include a question and answer period to be held in early December.
December.
I just said in early December. I don't think we've got a date.
Yeah.
Second.
The second
February
and mention you say garden, not farm.
You mentioned what?
You say garden, not farm.
Well, I put certain in the motion.
No,
I
just.
missed all that, sorry.
And so, just on the motion, so I think it's important for the milestones to be recognized in the community. You know, moving into production is a big milestone, and we should, let people know. I think that the virtues of the solar garden forum and I guess an open opportunity to ask questions, like, we'll be in a much better position to provide the community information like a little further down the line. So it's not crystal clear to me that we have all of the moving parts, and specifically how the utility will benefit, how the town's going to benefit, because we don't necessarily have all our visibility on our final costs, because we're still waiting for the final progress payments from the province. So I wonder if December is a little early. I know that Berwick is rolling out a community event in late November. Though they're a little further along than we are, and their project's up and done. Maybe they're even closer to knowing their final project costs. But I wonder, Dylan, if you see, like, is there a requirement for us to do this in December, or could we facilitate this on, February, on Valentine's Day, for example?
Yeah, I think, the rationale in having it now, as you say, is to recognize the milestone. We won't have all the answers. It is really likely it will be late April before we're really in the position that you're talking about. So, what I would suggest is we'll probably have a session for customers of the utility next year, for one reason or another. We would certainly take the opportunity to provide the, final, here's the final rundown of the solar garden. But that might also be something we time to coincide with the relaunch of the home program, for example. So, I wouldn't recommend not having an open house now. But yes, all the communications will have to take into account that not everything is done. But this is the third one we've had on the project, and every one of them we've been saying, well, we're only this far. So yeah, I would say it's still worth having one. we definitely will want to have a sort of postmortem assessment on the cost of the project and how it was financed and how the benefits are accrued to the community. And we may want to have another, in-person session for that. But maybe it could also include some other info that will be relevant next spring, summer.
Deputy Mayor?
Yeah, I guess one of the questions in my mind, so when you have an open house and you're selling a house, but people actually go through the house and see what you're having an open house, so sort of wondering whether residents and folks who benefit from it will never get a chance to.
Yeah, by that time, we will have worked out how we'll give people an actual walkthrough. I'm not sure it will be combined with that night itself.
Yeah.
But we will certainly have worked it out by then. It's just safety considerations at this point to be considered. How do you safely take people through an active facility?
Because I think that would be important in terms of recognizing what it is. Back and forth with Councillor Cover around farm garden piece might be answered when people go there to visit it. So I think it might be helpful for folks to get an opportunity to go in. It might be.
And it maybe 8 o'clock at night's the perfect time because it won't be producing.
Yeah.
So, no, we'll work that out, but no, absolutely. We've kind of treated these as virtual open houses
Yeah.
because originally there was nothing to visit the first time.
Yeah.
And still we'll bring lots of good information, pictures, everything, but it's not the same as going over there and seeing it.
Councillor Kerr?
Yeah, I'm sorry that this may sound frivolous, but the more I think about it, the more I sort of am intrigued by the idea of blending some seasonal cheerfulness into the evening.
We have a solar powered blender.
We'll
We,
get
we put up some Christmas lights.
Is
You
there
can
a,
make the point that when the switches flip, those Christmas lights became 18% cleaner.
I like that.
We could have a
There you
Christmas tree light up at the fire hall.
So those things to consider, we have plenty of time to plan, so.
Yeah, power switch.
But,
Okay.
yeah, if we can't nail down a time tonight, we'll need to do that quickly.
Yeah.
You're thinking the
So-
12th.
I was just gonna say, going back to the deputy mayor's thing. When we have the open house in early December. We should know a time when we could have the actual tour of the facility. So we can tell them that night that.
Oh, yes, yeah, we will know by then.
Yeah.
And we may be signing people up by then. I hope we will be. I hope we can do that at that time. Have some signups for tours and stuff.
Okay, Eric, can you read us the motion as you have it? For Councillor Carter?
I can. That council directs staff to work with area to hold a third open house and question and answer session for the solar garden project in early December.
Okay,
If I were to do that again, I would say solar farm.
So
Well, I mean.
so
It is.
I'm gonna put it to garden/farm.
Farm, thank you.
Friendly amendment. By the open house, we'll decide which one we're gonna use.
okay, on the question. All in favor? Motion's carried. Let's go to the second motion in that piece.
So Mayor, we've had a lot of conversations, and then again with our colleagues in Berwick and Antigonish today. I think we're all generally in the same place, which is that we're getting ready to move into production mode. And we need to have a temporary price point to provide the power from the facility to the utility. And so I think there's a general consensus between Berwick and Home Bay, who are in production mode now to move in this direction on an interim basis, and that's to use the avoided cost of purchasing from NSPI as the short-term rate. I think that we've also, and I know I do feel quite comfortable that we will, as a council, have we'll have many opportunities, but we'll certainly have a comprehensive opportunity to discuss the various, paths forward around the PPA. And how the PPA can benefit the utility and the community as a whole. So I'm feeling pretty comfortable that this is a good interim approach and would make a motion to that effect that council set the interim power purchase price for energy for the solar garden at the equivalent of the avoided costs of purchasing from NSPI until the long-term power purchase agreement is established.
PPA being power purchase agreement.
Mhm.
Councillor Wilson.
I would like to second that motion, but I would offer a friendly amendment to the motion to make it, instead of saying until a long-term power purchase agreement can be signed, say, until March 31st.
Just a note on that, though, we did just talk about how it would probably be the end of April before we'll actually know the interest rate.
Yes, well, my experience is people perform better under pressure.
Yeah,
Yeah, we can revisit it
So-
on March 31st.
Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, and probably I'm a little bit late to the party in this conversation. I still continue to be very uncomfortable when we talk about a price from an SPI that we've never got a number for.
yeah.
2 years,
That's,
2 years in the making now, so.
Yeah.
I would love to see a number.
Yeah, the challenge here, and I know we've talked about it many times, is that it's the demand rate. So it's not like we pay an SPI the same way we paid. And sorry, David, did you want to?
No, just,
So it's not like we pay an SPI the same way that we paid NB Power. We are charged differentially by Nova Scotia Power. So, you know, we can't say it's this rate per kilowatt hour. It's a rate structure, like the municipal rate code structure is the demand ratcheted structure. So that's the first part of the reason we've never been able to give you a straight answer, because it's not always the same cost, if that makes sense. But also traditionally, one of the complications with putting a price on an SPI's price is that they can use the fuel adjustment mechanism to retroactively change their price. That will not be part of the interim rate conversation. Like, we're going to use the avoided cost of an SPI as it existed at the time, even if it's retroactively increased on us. We won't retroactively increase the rate that our utility had to pay to the town. But we will use an equivalent rate structured in SPI. So, yeah, I totally take your point, because when we were purchasing from a different supplier, it wasn't a demand pricing, and we could just say, this is the amount. And I'm sure that, you know, if we need to produce a better paragraph about this complicated point, I'm sure Area could do that,
Yeah.
but it isn't as simple as to say it's exactly this price, and that's always been why it's been. And I mean, I'm just passing that on because this is the explanation I received, but.
So that is helpful, but so I would not vote for this until I get that structure clearly laid out, so that as the person making the decision, at least I have an understanding of the numbers we're talking about.
the pricing structure?
Yes, because I've not seen it.
Well, can I offer a suggestion? Because I assume we're getting bills from NSPI and we're paying them. So can we agree that the price that we're going to tack onto the solar power is the average per kilowatt or per megawatt hour price of the last 60 days going forward? So that's a real.
Yes, yeah.
We also have
Estimated,
we
yeah.
also have top up back productions too.
Yeah,
Yeah, I guess the reason I wrote it the way I did was to avoid having to make sure it was a technically perfect answer. So what we could do is, you know, we could defer this until a technically perfect answer can be provided. It's just that we will be doing it anyway, because it will enter production before our next council meeting. And we have to take the power.
And that's fair enough, but I think if we're going to make a decision, the vagueness needs to go away. Otherwise, this doesn't feel like a decision I can, if somebody asks you a question, so what exactly is that? Is the figure for that NSPI purchase point? I have no clue. Is it 75? What was talked about months ago? Is it 172? There has to be something that can help me answer that question.
So I think, you know, couple thoughts, one on the friendly amendment. If I think there's a lot of virtue in having a sunset, like a date. That's logical. Otherwise, we'll be using the same rate, you know, a year from now, because there's a lot of other things to do rather than go through the own. And, you know, this is coming from someone who works for the largest regulated utility. Have done a lot of regulatory costing, and it's not easy. And it will take a lot of heavy lifting to get the final PPA rate in. So I do think we need the number, the final number, but it's just, what's the time? I mean, what do you think is realistic before all the project costs are known, Dylan? like April, end of April is
The
reasonable?
thing that's the challenge is the borrowing. Because if we are going to MFC, you don't get to participate until mid-April. And only after you've participated, then about, a week later, they come back with your rate. So that would be the end of April. And that's the most likely source for borrowing. So if we set the PPA and it turned out that the rate we got was, 2% different in terms of the borrowing, it could be as variable as that.
I mean, I think we need to be talking July, right?
I mean,
Versus
to know
March.
absolutely that we know everything about it, I would say May, June at the soonest. If it's end of April that we know, then we come to council. If it's not up to us, or we'll do it quicker.
Yes, okay, I got you about the percentage rate. But if I put all of the associated costs of the per kilowatt hour pricing into a basket and gave it a good shake and took out the component that was the difference in interest rates between one loan and the other, it wouldn't make very much difference.
No, I mean,
My guess is,
Per kilowatt.
on a per kilowatt hour
cost.
basis.
well, when, right,
It might be a 0.5%. So if we're saying we're gonna charge $120 a megawatt hour. A change in interest rate might make that 118.
No, no, fair.
122.
fair enough.
So what?
I mean, the PPA has been calculated, like we have a business case that was the driver of the initial investment. That drove a PPA that we all signed up for.
Yeah.
So I think we understand that there are other costs that have also been incurred, including higher interest rates that are going to drive that rate higher. No surprise to anybody around the table. But it's not like it's a completely unknown number. You're right. I mean, you're going to have a PPA plus or minus a few percentage points because we just had a presentation of last council meeting that gave us the visibility on the final project costs. And the good news from the community's perspective is that it's on time and it's on budget. Now we're using the vast majority of the contingency, but there's no information that we've been provided publicly or informally to suggest that the overall project costs are higher, with the exception of the long-term borrowing costs, which are going to be materially different than originally expected. And we've got some other ancillary costs too that were never in the original project, like the power corridor based on the site selection. So that's new news. But it's not like we have no idea what the PPA is going to be, what the rate's going to be. It's just we have almost all of the raw data now. You can easily calculate a proxy, but that's still going to have to be worked up and done. I just don't know if the final number will be ready for March.
So this, in my limited understanding, we're trying to figure out how much we will pay ourselves,
Tomorrow, right?
Tomorrow.
Next week, yeah.
right? And so we can't go wrong.
No,
Whatever number we pick, we're paying ourselves, right? At the end of the day.
yes.
We've been purchasing power from NSPI for a while now, for a year or close to a year, I think. So there should be an average cost that can be averaged out and say, this is the average that we got.
Yeah.
Why don't we just set it at that and then push rather than 31st March, push it to June 30th with a deadline when all that can be calculated with a precise number, but at least there will be a number that the public and residents know this is what we are hanging by in our decision making.
I mean, those are fair points. As I understand it, only knowing enough to be dangerous.
Yes.
The challenge is that the URB has provided rates that we can charge customers based on the underlying price from NSP. That NSP price constantly changes based on loads and demand and time of year and a million other factors. And so if we set a rate, we're trying to set a rate based on a moving sliding scale at the same time that we can't establish a rate that's higher than NSP's. But on the other side, we don't necessarily want to establish a rate that's materially lower than NSP for the short term. So it's like we're trying to we're trying to hit a moving target. And I think the point of Dylan's motion is just to kind of address that in a way that illustrates that it's complex.
And we're agreeing to the principle that we were paying the utility was paying a certain amount. We will continue to be paying that amount. And instead of Nova Scotia Power shareholders getting the benefit of any difference, it's the town that's getting that benefit as a part of our project cost calculation. And when we calculate the final cost of the project, we'll be in a position to contemplate whether that power purchase profit from the construction period accrues to the reduction of the cost of the project or not. That's a conversation that we'll get to have, but first we have to set the price. I did, by the way, just email you the tariff booklet if you're interested to take a look.
Which is essentially what you're mapping to,
Yeah, but
the tariff.
Councillor Wilson.
Yes.
Councillor Feeny made an important point, and that is that we did make an application to the UARB with a price. What was the price?
The tariff price.
Yeah, what was that number?
That's the
So
point, that
that's
the
the number
tariff's
we can't
unknown.
go higher than, use that number.
But we had to
That is-
pay a consultant tens of thousands of dollars to do the math.
But we've got the number.
What we do.
We've already paid the money, so why don't we use it?
But the point is that the number is the authorized tariff. The tariff isn't a number, the tariff is the authorization of the price, which is constantly changing based on the ratchet. So like, I think the point is like, the tariff, as you can see from the tariffs, what, 400 pages long or whatever, but the tariff doesn't say 99.99.
No.
Like
And
the
I did
tariff's
just send
not,
it out, and you can look at how it works, but it doesn't work in a way that it's easy to
Like
come to a number.
yeah, the tariff, so the tariff there's a million equations within the tariff. So I guess the point is what we're saying is that we are just going to charge the municipal tariff rate that we're offsetting. And that versus being hung up on the fact that it's the number. If we need a number, well, we know the number, we have a proxy for the number, but we just don't have the number to the.
Yeah, the number will be known retroactively based on
Right.
demand, yeah.
Councillor No.
Yeah, well, in the motion, we're saying we're going to charge the equivalent of the avoided cost of person. In order to charge that, we gotta figure that out. So
We
why
will
can't we
know
have
it retroactively, so we just don't know it in advance. And that's why the motion
Yeah.
worded the way it is, because we can't know it before we've done the actual demand.
So can we not figure out, like, say, the average, we've been paying NSPI something along the way. So we cannot figure out the average of that, put that in here now, and then adjust it if we see that it's different.
I guess that was my point of it. It would be very hard to do that versus very simple to do this. And there'd be no difference except an agonizing math lesson for everyone involved,
Councillor Carver.
which we can do.
Well, I like to keep things simple, and I thought I understood it the way it's phrased now. Which I understand to be for the past year, we've been paying whatever NSP billed us. We didn't know in advance what it was gonna be, did we?
No, all we knew is that it would be calculated based on the tariff.
Well, we know
And
it's-
NSP has the power to calculate that and
Yeah,
then give us the bill.
and they look at the community's demand and that's how it's
Yeah,
calculated.
so we haven't known for the past year what we were gonna be billed from.
No,
NSP.
all we know is the way in which they would calculate the bill, yeah.
But we never knew how much, so we never had a figure in advance. So I'm comfortable with doing it this way because it's just what we've been doing for the past
How the
year.
rate structure works.
Just so it's crystal clear to everybody watching this, we absolutely know what the municipal tariff is. It's regulated, and there's an entire regulatory regime that ensures that it's fair. And what we've been doing is we've been buying based on that fair rate set by our regulator and the province's regulator, fair, finest kind. Once our electrons they start getting producing, they're just going to displace this the volume coming from NSP, and we're just going to get. But every electron that we use from our will change the average rate of all the rest of the power that we're still getting from NSP. So that's why, like, at some point, it's kind of all or none to get the full benefit that we've talked about 100% decarbonization. Fair enough. But I think at this point, the deputy mayor is not wrong. And it would be a lot easier to communicate to the public at large if we had a number saying, hey, we're selling, our costs are 90 and we're selling it to the utility at 100 and keeping the 10% markup for ourselves. That's a nice, simple story. That's the story that we will have. We just aren't going to have that until July. But for tonight, I think the motion is the best we can do, knowing that unless we want to get, I just think this is the best we can do
And there
tonight.
will be days, you know, to your point about we won't know until we see the demand, like there will be days where we would in depth of winter. Kind of really cold, really sunny day. We had one last winter and it was -29, but it was sunny. That kind of a day, the solar garden will shave our peak. The solar garden will reduce us from hitting that max demand, which will reduce the overall cost of power from NSPI. As I understand it, not even just that day, but over some time based on the tariff, but again, it's very complicated. So we really don't know how the interaction of the solar garden and NSPI's demand ratchet pricing will be. And we should only need to know for a little while, because hopefully we won't be NSPI customers for too long. But that interaction is even more complicated because when the solar garden is producing, will interact with when demand is peaking in a way that's going to change depending on the weather over the next number of months.
They cutting to the chase from the community's perspective. Like the solar garden is going to be producing power that is substantially cheaper than the power we're buying from Nova Scotia Power. So in the fullness of time, the community writ large is going to benefit from a guaranteed, dedicated, on-grid source of power. That's generation cost is cheaper than the purchase than what we're purchasing from NSP today. And good news is the good times are starting next week, apparently. We just need to it'd be great if the federal government accelerated their payments.
So 16% of the power solar garden output, that will reduce 16% of the cost we pay for our total electrical bill. The NSPI piece is not going to change. What's going to change is the 16% that comes from the solar field.
But that's an average of
Yeah,
the course of
and
the
we
year, right? Some days they're going to be displacing like 90%. Other days they're only going to be displacing 5%. It's not 16% each day.
No,
It's some days the solar garden will produce all the town's power needs.
But
Other days it'll only produce a
it's
little.
like the NSPI multiplier that's based on the 8th of February when your maximum consumption occurs.
Exactly.
That affects your power all throughout the year.
Yeah, and if it's a sunny day, then the solar garden will help to cut that
To
down.
cut it
Yeah.
down, because the multiplier will be less.
But that's only until we stop buying from NSPI. And then we won't have to worry about all these demand ratcheted pricing things anymore.
Are we ready for the motion? Have we had a motion?
We haven't had the second motion yet, I don't believe.
Well,
yes.
yeah, I think we did, and Kelly said he
It's on the
seconded
floor.
it with the caveat of March 31st. And then the mover didn't want to accept that, so Kelly, are you gonna
I'm
change that?
withdrawing my second.
Why don't we let's just make it July 1st. You okay with that?
Canada.
June
No,
1st, Steve.
no.
June 1st?
I'm not gonna negotiate it.
Well,
I think we can do better than that. Let's leave it open ended, see where it ends up.
No.
well, I don't think we want to do that. So why don't we? So we're going, this will edit the motion with I guess, until June 1st. How's that sound?
I think that's achievable.
Well,
One second,
that goes come out every 2 months,
Well,
Now we're in discussion.
May, June.
So I'm still not convinced. I appreciate when an institution puts out a 153 booklet to tell you how they'll charge you, then it's fundamentally problematic when you're dealing with the public. And so I think, I mean, I don't talk too much about it, but I think it would be more elegant for us if we had a number. If we had a rationale as to how we arrived at that number, the URB would understand that and we're doing it temporarily, but I just wanted to make that point.
Councillor Wilson.
We should vote.
I agree with the deputy mayor. I think we should have a number. And I don't quite understand the objection to going back for 2 months, 6 months, or 9 months. I don't care. And averaging out the per kilowatt hour cost that we've been charged by NSPI and simply using that number. I don't understand why that wouldn't work.
I mean, you've now had a chance to read that paragraph. I don't know if you want me to read it, but the paragraph that summarizes how Nova Scotia Power will determine what we're going to be charged.
I read the municipal tariff and it was a one pager. It was pretty straightforward.
Well, the first thing was that the per month kilowatt ampere, the higher of maximum actual demand of the current month, or the maximum demand of the previous December, January, and February occurring in the previous 11 months, but excluding the actual monthly peak demand recorded during the first 2 hours following restoration of any outage of at least 1 hour in duration. In this circumstance, the next highest monthly peak demand registered outside of the restoration period will be used. Customers make.
If I may, this is getting beyond the point. We have numbers. We know we've been paying bills. We know how many kilowatt hours we paid for. We know how much we pay for them. We can do some simple long division and find out how much per kilowatt hour we've been paying. Never mind all the verbiage from NSPI and their various and sundry NDAs.
But we're going into the highest demand part of the year. 2/3 of our demand happens in the winter. The rates that are charged are different in the summer and the winter.
If I may, your worship, I'd like to ask Councillor Wilson a question.
Yes, please.
How would that help, having a number?
Well, I guess the deputy mayor's concern, and I share it, is we're saying we're gonna charge this NSPI rates. But we don't know what it is. We don't know what they are. How can we even do it? I mean,
So once we have incurred costs, we will know what it costs.
so if we get a megawatt hour of power next week from the solar facility, we're not gonna pay ourselves until next June. We're just gonna accrue that?
Immediately.
How can we? We don't know how much.
So
It's
it's
the-
two different things.
You're
Once we've incurred the costs, we'll know what Nova Scotia Power would have charged us for it. We'll know that right away.
No.
What you want to know what it will cost us to produce it, we won't know that until next June.
No, I don't care how much it costs to produce it.
So that's the thing we want to know until next June.
You're offsetting your consumption from NSP.
Yeah.
So
How much would we have paid them?
well, you're going to know is when you look at the bill.
Yeah.
Because remember, we're still billing through to our customers. The customer's we're gonna invoice our customer, they're gonna pay us, and we're going to net out pay out in NSP what we owe them and area what we owe them. And the rest of the money is forwarded back to town of Lone Bay. I mean, or you could just pick a number.
Because if you pick a number based on the past, like the problem with going the past 6 months is that we will pay more for our energy proportionally for each bit of energy in the next 6 months than we paid in the last 6 months. Because NSPI charges more in the winter because there's more energy used in the winter in the province.
Because it's multiplied.
And basically,
So,
Go ahead, you were.
your worry is how much we put in our pockets, basically.
Yeah.
At the end of the day.
Yeah,
Right? It has nothing to do with what an SPI is charging us, or whether they'll charge higher or less. We're trying to figure out how much we will pay ourselves because of what we've saved. At the end of the day.
yeah, so the
Yeah.
point is, if you set the number too low, the worst case scenario is we accidentally pay ourselves less than we could have, which only just leaves the utility with a little bit of a windfall.
Which is
in
okay.
that sense. Yeah.
Which is
not
our,
the- it's not
which
the
is
end of the
our
world.
own utility.
Yeah,
So could we
Well-
think about setting it as a percentage rather than a flat figure
yeah, percentage of what councillor Perry?
of whatever NSP is billing us?
I don't think that would help these guys. 'cause we still-
So, cut and chase, like, I've been begging for a PPA strategy discussion for months. For months. We're here tonight, we're going into production 3 days from now. Like, we can pick any number, but remember, if we pick a number and it's materially below NSP's number, then we could have then we may have to file that. Like there's regulatory issues, and then all of a sudden because we've set the rate based on the NSP tariff. So if we're going to provide the utility with the power below the tariff, which has been our historical strategy, fine is fine, but we need to be able to establish that. We won't be able to establish that until June. So we can't go that route. So the only other thing we can do is to use the municipal tariff, which is what we're using, which does not have a number in all 147 pages. There is not a number. There's no 999, 99.99. There's no number. All there is pages and pages and pages and pages and pages of mathematical equations. And dozens and dozens of accountants and regulators and engineers who interpret those things. So if we're going to set a rate tonight, that would be doing what took the URB, $80,000 and 5 meetings and BDR, and I just don't think that's a wise use of our time. Or we can just defer the motion. We can just we don't have to pass the motion. We can provide the power to the utility for free.
Is that the?
I wouldn't recommend doing that, but we can do that.
So what are that brings me to the point also I made. What happens if we don't pass this tonight? I mean, we're gonna produce it in another week or so.
Yeah, I mean, I think
what happens after that?
speaking, Joe is right. We probably would then not be charging anything for it, which is
Yeah, well,
That's not good.
that's not.
Councillor Wilson.
Your worship, we're under the auspices of the municipal tariff, is that correct?
I believe.
Yes.
The municipal tariff is on page 41 of the document you gave me.
Yeah.
And it says the per kilowatt KVA charge will be $13.42.8 per month, per household, I assume. And the cents per kilowatt hour will be, as effective February 2nd of this year past, $9.31. Period.
and then those riders that are referenced below.
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of other stuff, but I mean, there are numbers.
I mean, I guess in as much as we said, what would be the worst possible thing that would happen if we guessed wrong and we set it too low? Similarly, if we just say equivalent to the NSPI price, the worst thing that could happen is that we make sure to capture 100% of the avoided costs, which is, again, I'm not sure why that would be bad.
Yeah, if the utility wants to buy the solar garden from the town, fair enough. Don't charge yourself anything.
Yeah.
No, it's truly. I mean, that's a scenario too.
Yeah.
Your worship, we have a motion and
Yes, we do.
seconded on the floor, and we've had a lot of discussion, and I think maybe everybody hasn't had a chance to speak who wants to speak.
And now we're missing one of our members.
Now we're missing one of our
Are you
members.
calling for the question, Councillor? Davis?
I am asking, I'm not going to call for the question because I dislike that idea intensely.
Oh,
But I'm wondering if you would like to call, the chair would like to call for the question.
It's a little bit of that work around.
Any other comments?
Let's make sure Richard's back. I mean,
Yeah, I will.
Can we hit my?
And I request that you ask the motion to be repeated so we know exactly
Yes,
what the motion
good
is.
idea. Yep,
and I guess while we're waiting, I'll apologize because I really didn't think it was going to be such a contentious or complicated thing to, you know. I'm a layperson, so I wrote it like a layperson, and anyone watching is also a layperson and probably would be better able to understand the concept than the notion, or at least that's what I thought.
Yeah, yes and no.
I know, we've had the whole conversation. But that was what I honestly had thought when I put it together. All right.
okay. On the question.
We're gonna have the
So
motion.
you're gonna give it, go ahead.
So I have a motion by Councillor Feeny, seconded by Councillor Wilson, that council set the interim power purchase price for energy from the solar garden at equivalent to the avoided cost of purchasing from NSPI until June 1st, 2024.
Okay, I'd like a recorded vote for this.
In alphabetical order.
You're number one.
I am voting for the motion.
Okay. And I am voting for the motion. Councillor Feeney,
I'm a yay on the motion.
okay. Suzanne, Councillor Lawrence Croft,
Yes.
okay. Councillor Now,
Yeah, I have some reservations on it, but I can live with ways per, so yes.
K comes before in. Deputy Mayor,
I'm a no.
you're a malt, thank you. And Councillor Wilson,
Do this, yes.
okay.
Yes, with an asterisk.
Motion is carried. Okay,
What was the number?
6-1. Yep. Okay. You got everything you need, CAL?
Yep.
Okay. Let's go to the wildfires letter review.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So some time ago, and following the wildfires this summer, council received a detailed letter from Varian Hasem and Valerie Herder with a lot of good recommendations about things that could be done in the community to reduce the risk of wildfires. So council directed that the staff, our climate and energy program manager put this report together because of the interrelations between the urban forest management plan development and the recommendations that were provided. So as you'll see, she had the opportunity to make contact with the provincial wildfire coordinator, and they've had some good interactions on some of the steps that could be taken. And we did have some recommendations there. So the first off being to continue to work with the provincial forest protection wildlife management department to develop a community wildfire prevention plan, which is something that with their limited capacity, they are offering to assist municipalities to do. And then also that the recommendations contained in the letter from Mr. Hasem and Ms. Herder be incorporated into the scope of the urban forest management plan where appropriate. And throughout the report, you'll see where Lauren sees some opportunities to do that.
Do you want motion second?
Two motions, please.
I'm happy to make the first motion that council directs staff to work with the provincial forest protection wildfire management department to develop a community wildfire prevention plan.
We have a second. Councillor Lawrence Croft seconds. On the question. All in favor? Motion is carried. Let's go to part 2.
Shall I just carry on?
If you
My
like.
mouth open, okay. Move that the recommendations contained in the letter from Mr. Hasem and Ms. Herder be incorporated into the scope of the urban forest management plan where appropriate.
We have a seconder, Councillor Feeney.
I couldn't find the original letter on this, so I'm wondering what
Oh, sorry,
recommendations
you're
you're referring to.
So the recommendations are kind of, each of them are the highlighted things above with the numbers, so numbers 1 through 8. That's Lauren's sort of summarizing of what was included in the letter. So those are the 8 recommendations. But we can also point you back to the letter because it was obviously was circulated quite some time ago. I didn't realize that we didn't attach it there. That's my fault. But it was those 8 recommendations.
I'm curious why we would not wait for the Forest Protection Wildfire Management Department's plan before we incorporate it into our urban forest management plan.
I think they'll just be synergistic. Like we're planning to be doing the development of the urban forest management plan through the winter and spring of 2024. So if we say now, can we get started with this wildfire plan? You know, Lauren will be working with them on that while we're getting a contractor contracted to do the urban forest management plan. So I don't think we'll have a unexpected contradiction between the two documents. There's a lot of interaction between the two documents. I think they can be developed synergistically. I think that's probably the best way to do it. So we already have a timeline for the urban forest management plan, so we would want to stick to that for all the other reasons.
There are just some of these points that I have a real problem with. Because as far as putting in fire breaks go, and they're saying about the trail is nowhere near a fire break. When they had the fires up Shelburne County, there's 3 lanes of highway, and that fire jumped it.
Which one are you looking at?
Number 4.
So the way I understand it is that these are just suggestions, it's not what we adopt.
So what,
Okay,
so I just wanted to speak to that specifically, so what we'd say there would be, we would ask the consultant who's developing the urban forest management plan to consider whether there are any opportunities to designate, establish and maintain fire breaks. And then that consultant would be able to look at what you're talking about, Richard, with the expertise needed to determine if there are any opportunities to do that. And they may very well come back and say, no, there aren't any opportunities to do that, but we'd have asked someone who is a professional in forestry management, you know, rather than just a concerned citizen.
Mayor, I guess on that front, I noticed that the town of Lunenburg in the last 3 months actually had approved an authorization for very specific pump equipment, specifically to address the forest fire situation. I'm not sure what the nuance was, but I know that the fire department was somewhat aware, but I would think that if there's going to be a management plan, it wouldn't break my heart to also see that plan align with long-term equipment requirements to fight a forest fire. If there's some specialty equipment that could support the fire department, as long as that was woven into the storyboard.
And I think
that'd be
that's why
wise.
it's important to keep the community wildfire prevention plan separate from the urban forest management plan, because certain components of what was being recommended are forestry management practices, but other things to be done in terms of wildfire protection, like what you're talking about, equipment for the department, that's excluded from the forestry management. So we have 2 different ways of ensuring synergistically that the wildfire prevention is included in our plan. And I think these 2 recommendations cover that.
Personally, I think it's gonna be very hard for us to say, we're gonna prevent wildfires. We can help prevent them from going any further, that type of thing, but as far as preventing them goes, I think the best way to that is education.
You stop short of saying only you could prevent forest fires. But yes, I'm sure that's very
Smokey
true.
the Bear.
Anything further on the question? No? All in favor? Opposed?
This is incorporating these things into it, is that the one we're working
Yeah.
on now?
Yes. Opposed, and I'm opposed as well.
All right, well, thank you.
Okay, let's go to Kinburn to the main multi-use trail.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So this is the, I think, one of the only remaining recommendations from the Blue Root Community Hubs pilot project that happened back in 2018. And we have, whether people are really aware of it day to day or not, generally carried out most of the conceptual recommendations of that study. And I did want to reiterate them here, and I did that, you know, essentially making back streets of the town suitable for all ages, active transportation, cycling, walking, irrespective of the need for dedicated infrastructure. If we have less than 1,000 vehicles per day on a street and the prevailing speed is below 30, that street is suitable for use by, you know, children, all ages, all abilities type of active transportation uses. And what we really clearly determined through the Blue Root Community House pilot was that Main Street would never meet those criteria. The speed limit's 50, the province will let us change it. The streets are quite tight. There's no room for separation of infrastructure. So what we built on was the notion that the back streets provide a contiguous network to access the whole community between Kinburn, Claremont, Pond Street, Pleasant Street, the Faubourg Road, you know, where we put in these speed humps and things. You've got a whole network that takes you all through the entire community, with one exception being how you get from Kinburn over to Clearway. And particularly with there being a secondary residential neighborhood and the school and some trail access points on that end of town, there was a desire to see an interconnection between all of the infrastructure on one side of town and the infrastructure on the other through the intersection of Clearway and Main. And so when we made that a three-way stop, it was intended to complement that eventual movement of traffic. But the missing piece was, how do you get people from Kinburn over to Main? So the proposal that was made way back when had to do with the NSLC property. It's essentially perfectly situated to provide a transportation corridor. We went to NSLC, they said they'd be willing to consider it, but essentially came down to preservation of parking. So using some of the time left over with WSP from not going any further with the Main and Edgewater Street intersection, I got them to do some estimates on this so that we could provide those to NSLC if we are inclined to continue to do that. So that's what's provided here. I think it's pretty straightforward in terms of the actual proposal and recommendation. So it's just kind of down to, are we willing to see if NSLC would be interested? And if so, then together to try to figure out how such a thing could be paid for, hopefully by the province. So the recommendation here was direct staff to share these concepts with NSLC for their consideration.
Yes, Councilwoman Scott.
I observed, I perused the diagrams. And I do like what they're doing, and I'll probably use it more than anyone because it's in my front yard. My concern is, and we may address it in the next item, but the use of ATVs, that's the pathway is very straight. We have an issue already with ATVs accessing the liquor store property. You can see where they've torn up the grass and they drive right over the curb and up around to access the liquor store. And sometimes they just access Main Street and go up to the Long Hill Road that way. That's regular use. So I can see that straight walkway becoming a raceway for ATVs because they're coming off the trail by the tennis court, Hawthorne Hill, on a regular basis now. The temptation, I think, will be very great. So are we willing to have enforcement for that? It sort of ties into what we may decide in the next item, but that is a concern of mine because, you know, without a road, a pathway there, they're accessing a route through that.
And even though they shouldn't legally be on Kinburn, they are already.
Yeah,
So one way to deal with that would be the placement of bollards. You know, we could just size it so that an ATV can't get on it,
mhm.
but that also can affect accessibility. You know, larger motor scooters, sometimes pretty close to the size of an ATV, so they would also not be able to do this.
So Mayor, I think, you know, there have been very few presentations that really over my whole tenure on council has been as impactful as that Blue Route presentation. I mean, most of those recommendations have been implemented or in the process of being implemented, including the three-way stop and any number of improvements we've made on traffic calming along Kinburn, along Claremont, around Pleasant Street. I mean, we've incorporated probably 80 to 85% of those recommendations over the last 5 years. This was always a project that looked terrific and it made so much sense, and the proponents from the experts who came in and gave that presentation to council really talked about it in the sense of safety on how you get school children from the school to the other end of town safely through a corridor with a limited amount of traffic, and how you get a route through Jubilee Park and off the Pleasant Street and up Pond Street and so on and so forth, linking one end of town with the other end of town safely for school children. At the time, 2018, like the cost of this project, which is similar to what we see on the page here, was like $50,000-$60,000. Now we're talking $300,000. I think regardless if it's 50,000 or 100,000 or 300,000, that will be a debate for council about affordability. It'd be worthwhile spending time having that discussion. it would be a lot easier to have that discussion if we had the authorization and approval that NSLC will allow us to do it. So if you look on any number of council reports over the last 5 years, we've been trying to get a resolution on, are they good? Will they allow us to do it? And if this resolves that issue one way or the other, fair enough. We're not saying we're gonna spend $300,000 on this project next year, but if we can utilize this plan to get a definitive answer from NSLC, that's good enough for me for the next year. And we'll let the next council figure out how they're gonna finance it once they have permission. So, but if we can, I do also think that if we cannot get a timely answer from NSLC, we should just let's not keep it around for 10 years. Let's just see if they'll say yes. And if they'll say yes, great. And if they don't say yes, let's put a star on it and move along.
Anything else?
Yes, I think we should go ahead. A little bit of a concern is that it will not be just NSLC that will have some concerns. The two properties that will be abiding that I can't call it a road, but that corridor.
The residential's on either side of the parking lot?
Yes,
Yeah.
that they will have some concerns, I'm pretty sure, and maybe a conversation would be helpful with them so that it doesn't start generating some negative.
Yeah, and it essentially came back to that point that Joe mentioned, which is like, we could hardly approach the neighbors if NSLC hadn't. But as soon as they might, that would be steps that would need to be taken before we went further with implementation.
Yeah, but I think, I mean, it's ideal for us to have a corridor that goes across for all those reasons that I've mentioned.
We do have Spruce Street.
Yeah.
We do those across.
No sidewalk.
But we've got a sidewalk that comes right down Main Street and around the corner, across the crosswalk, there's a sidewalk to the school. I wonder how many young people take their bicycles to school. I guess my question is, what's the anticipated use of the $300,000 corridor through the liquor store parking lot? When, like I say, you've got Spur Street with the sidewalks on. There's no sidewalk on Kinburn. So the young person is going to come down the unsidewalked street
No, they're not supposed to. Say that.
to go through the little kids do.
Well, yeah.
It's because we don't have local cops anymore to chase them away like when I was a kid.
So, I mean, it's a good question, but I also point out, I mean, if we think about, for instance, the soccer field, there was that question around use and how much it's being used. It's the improvement of it that got it, gets it to the use part. And so creating the infrastructure, from my perspective, will show how much people have been missing it. Right now, it's not, people are not doing it as much as they would have to, because the infrastructure doesn't support them to do that. Right? So like, if I think about my own kids, they would love to do that, but it's kind of tricky for them to get from here without going onto the road. And if you go on the sidewalk, there's some people who will be going for their walk and definitely impacting the traffic. But if they had a corridor where they could just ride to school, they will do that every day. So it's over the, I mean, we don't have a perfect infrastructure, but over the long term, we want to make those small improvements so that it just becomes natural. And that's what people do. And you will be shocked as to how many people will be using it. So we're not spending the money now.
No, exactly.
And we probably won't have the question of, would you do it for $300,000?
Yeah.
We hope to have the question of, would you do it for 25% of that if we can secure external funding?
Yeah.
It is a big swath of property in the middle of Mahone Bay, selling, that's owned by the Crown.
It was very interesting talking to them, because this is one of the last liquor stores that they actually own. Like they used to have one in Chester, many people would recall that they divested and moved into the independent store as a tenant. And that's much more common. So what they've said is that where they do have the ownership of some of these properties, they like to see them used in ways that benefit the community. Like, so maybe there's some synergy there with the fact that they own this property.
See if they want to cost share the sidewalk.
I don't, but they haven't ruled out that they might contribute. I don't want to suggest that they would, but I don't believe it's beyond the pale that they might contribute to the cost.
Well, if they say yes, then great, we'll have something to talk about, but if they say no, fair enough, and we'll put it to bed.
And if
It has
they say
been-
yes, and we'll cover the cost out of all those cannabis profits, well, even better.
It's been 5 years, we have other things to do too.
So that motion will get us to that.
Mhm.
Yes.
Get it into the hands of the Nova Scotia Power, the liquor store people and get their reaction to it.
So before we go to a vote, I'm trying to picture how bicycles, for example, will move after they get to Main Street. They'll have to cross Main Street to ride on the street rather, but the temptation is going to be to ride on the sidewalk.
There's been a lot of conversation about how to do that. And the only challenge, and you'll probably remember some of this conversation, is that there are a couple of trees. So it'd be easy enough to widen the sidewalk to allow for a separated pedestrian bicycle movement on the sidewalk, with the exception that there are two large trees on the other side of the entrance, but before you get to the crossing of Clearway. And those two large trees would prevent the sidewalk from being widened quite enough to fully accommodate that. So that does remain a question. I think that it's something that we can, when we have the survey work done for this project to do the water wastewater project, we can really get down to and understand in the background of that project how much width we have with the roadway. A subtle alteration of the roadway direction might get us the necessary space. You don't want to jog your road up and down and it looks like you're, but if you do it subtly over a long time, you might be able to shift Main Street 2 feet and get the sidewalk space. Because there's room on the other side, there's no sidewalk on the other side. So you just have to get, you basically go back like 500 meters so that you don't even notice that the street moves. But you could do it, but we'd be able to use the engineering work and the surveys captured for this project that's about to happen to then inform that sidewalk redesign potentially.
So this would be sidewalks on the salt box side of the street.
No, this would just be shifting the paved street a couple of feet
Gondolas.
towards that side.
Yeah.
Over the space
So the-
between the intersection and,
Uh-huh.
maybe
Oh,
six
okay.
houses down, like give it enough room that you wouldn't notice.
Okay.
Yeah, and that might gain us the sidewalk room, because if we had 8 to 10 feet of sidewalk, we'd be able to have a designated bike strip along the inside of the sidewalk that just says, keep your bike over here.
Okay,
And
so
then that would be the best option. There's two big trees that I know it came up before, but if we didn't move the street at all, we didn't do that, we would run into those two trees. I think there'll be room to make it all fit, it just is, little nuance.
And those trees close to end of life. They look to be.
I won't make that determination, but we now have a contractor who will.
the power out a few times in
Yeah.
storms.
I'll ask the contractor to consider that for next year.
As long as we plant 10 new ones for every one we cut
Yeah.
down.
I always, when I look at them, they look like a risk to me. They look to be close to end of life, and so.
To be continued.
That's good, Dylan, that's great.
Yes.
The locus.
Yeah.
So I don't think we have a motion on the table yet, though. I don't.
I'll make the motion.
Okay.
That council direct staff to share the multi-use path concept and estimates from WSP Inc. with Nova Scotia Liquor Commission for their consideration.
Seconded,
No.
Deputy Mayor? Seconds. You've heard the motion duly seconded by the Deputy Mayor. On the question, all in favor? Motion is carried. Let's go to the last item on the agenda, this staff report part, the Road Trails Act.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So this is just being highlighted for information. Mayor and I were talking about the news release that recently came forward for the province, and how there was some opportunity for confusion around that. So I just wanted to provide a little bit of an update about the new Road Trails Act and what it means and what potentially it means for the town. And I think for anybody watching, the new Road Trails Act is an act that allows for the designation of roads as permitting within the roadway. And that doesn't necessarily mean within the paved surface, but it could, the operation of off-highway vehicles. So it is up to the province or municipality owning the roadway to make the determination that a road trail exists. it's typically done to connect to non-contiguous portions of OHV Trail. Based on a review of Mahone Bay and our trails, which are contiguous, and the fact that we have no areas in town that permit off-highway vehicles that are not directly connected to the trail system, and we actually prohibit them within our parks, I would recommend that we not designate any roads as road trails at this time. But I did want to make council aware of the legislation and the option to do that going forward. And in the meantime, to request that council accept this report for information. So I haven't taken a question.
Mr. Mayor?
So-
Councilor now.
You said there's nothing in town. But I'm just thinking of Fairmont Street and Bobo Road, joining the trail there. If somebody's like lives down where I live, there's no way of accessing that trail because we can't go through the park. So, the best way is right up over Fairmont to back to the trail.
There's really nowhere anyone in town can access the trail if their property doesn't abut the trail. But I think that common understanding that no matter where you live in town, if you don't abut the trail, the appropriate thing is to put your four-wheeler or your OHV on the back of a truck and trailer and drive it to a proper trailhead location. And I guess once you start saying, well, you can't access it from one space, but you can't access it from any place. You can't access it from Main Street either.
Does that mean we turn a blind eye to people who do?
We certainly don't now. No, it's a very difficult enforcement matter, but we try to enforce it now.
Yeah.
So is it something where the town should be giving notice that the provincial legislation that provides for off-road vehicles to drive on streets in the town doesn't apply?
Yeah, it only provides for off-road vehicles to drive on the couple of sections that are
That's
designated.
right,
routes.
yeah.
And I think a little thing in the newsletter, just reminding people that the new act does not allow for off-highway vehicles on Mahone Bay streets is a reasonable little reminder for next month. But I think, and between Eric and I, we'll try to remember that. But I think that would probably be as far as I would see it going, unless at some point the future council did want to designate a street. But again, we have quite a robust trail system and we even have a trail intersection within town. So I don't think there's a need for it at this time. But yeah, and we have a motion on the floor to accept for information, so that's not the thing.
Okay,
I'll make the motion.
go ahead.
Oh, it's all done.
All in favor? There goes to TV. Thank you.
Well, we get all the way up to
Yeah,
point 10,
yeah.
that was a solid. numbers there.
Now we're down to number 7, Councillor Wilson, notice of motion, October 10th. Coming forward.
That was, I actually requested that notice of motion be withdrawn about 10 days ago. And someone didn't make the cut, but it was with regard to the usage of the old fire hall. And we, I think, at the last policy meeting, agreed to defer that.
I think that what Kelly said, and we should have caught it under approval of agenda,
Okay.
was that because you made the notice of motion
Okay.
in the minutes of the last meeting, we couldn't actually remove it from this agenda, but we can remove it now.
Okay.
So that's what it was about.
Lunenburg County Senior Safety Program monthly report. There's 5 reports, if anyone has any questions on any of them. I think there's somebody who will speak to them. Councillor Owens-Croft?
I just want to remind people that I did send out a mini questionnaire to members of council and staff. Because I've been requested to meet with the executive to see how they can improve services in Mahone Bay and see if people are actually using them. And we're as a council and a town providing information to seniors in our community and their caregivers when requested.
Okay, thank you. We had the PAC update, Climate and Environment Committee.
There is something from the Heritage. I just wanted to just let council know that the Climate and Environment Committee, this isn't the minutes, but that the committee did make a visit to the Sustain recycling facility in Chester last week. And were pretty universally impressed by the technology. So I think that's going to be, we're probably going to be having more discussions in the future as about that kind of that.
Okay, thank you. Heritage Advisory Committee minutes?
Mayor, there's just a couple items. We had a workshop earlier in the month. 2 or 3 hours actually, and had quite a bit of progress. There are two kind of actions that came out of that. First being a request that originally was going to come to council from the museum under the general grants process. But I think the general consensus is that the request could be facilitated through the town's heritage property grant funding fund. And so there is a request from the museum for $500 from that fund, of which we have funding that's used and not allocated. And therefore the committee would recommend the council to support the request of $500 towards the overall $3,695 capital project for window work at the museum to be funded from the Heritage Property Grant Fund.
Okay, that is your motion.
Please.
Do we have a seconder, Councillor Carter? Okay, moved and seconded.
The
On the question, all in
Yeah.
favor?
thanks very much.
Motion carried.
We also had kind of a comprehensive conversation about the Heritage Grant Fund policy, or the Heritage Grant policy. Kelly had included a number of edits that the committee is recommending the council evaluate and support making these changes. So I'm not sure what the cadence is on when these housekeeping changes can be made. But really the key salient points are around the budget has about a $2,000 annual appropriation, of which the maximum grant is $500. And the policy's been in place for about 5 years. And the grant you just approved is the third grant in 5 years. So the thinking of the committee is that based on inflationary factors and the limited uptake, given the fact that there are only 20 buildings that qualify for the funding, that we should change the funding maximum to $1,000, keep the 50% cap based on, so if you spend $2,000 to get $1,000 is the ratio, but essentially to increase the grant amount from $500 to $1,000 in recognition that, there is time and effort to apply. You have to send in your package to the committee, it has to be evaluated. So, if you're going to make the idea is to promote the stewardship and maintenance of these historical buildings. So we thought that would be a wise decision. There's also a companion grant, a matching grant from the province, that our grant helps the homeowner or the museum in this case also leverage the provincial grant. So they do, if you qualify for one, chances are you'll qualify for the other one. So they work in tandem. There are a number of, so that's really the salient point of the changes. Really, that was the big one. Few other wordsmithing issues, and of course, we had the benefit of having Annette there, and of course, Councillor Carver. So I think we made a lot of improvements to the overall project. But really, we're trying to make the grant program easier to gain access to it, and also trying to understand like the timelines. Like sometimes the grant request parameters would really thwart someone for even applying because of the limitations of the timelines. And sometimes, like, for example, you have to go and get 3 quotes from 3 different contractors. Well, maybe in 2018, but today you're just hoping to get anybody you can swing a hammer. So I mean, little changes there. So the committee's recommending the changes as noted to the grant fund. policy, actually, a policy and,
And
Not
you were
sure.
right, Joe, to point out that you don't need to make a motion because we really have to wait until the next meeting of council to satisfy our policy around when policies
Right.
can be approved. So,
so I think I'll leave it there, but I think these are changes that are an improvement and, anyway, we can consider them at the appropriate time.
and Eric, just make a note that that will have to be, to provide due consideration, we'll have to put this on the next council meeting agenda.
Okay. Thank you. Last one, the Social Store Open Doors Association. Soda. We have someone, Councillor Carver, are you involved with soda?
No, I'm not involved with it directly, but it is closely affiliated with Housing Action Coalition.
Yeah.
And we have agreed as a council to receive those reports on the
Yeah.
agenda every month, so.
Okay. Thank you.
And they're good to have.
No other questions? Any questions from the folks at home, Deputy CAO?
Yeah, there is a comment I can read out from Reza Gath. It just it says, hello, 924 Main Street, still hoping to hear some positive news from the council regarding to my right of using the town road beside my home to be able to subdivide my land afterward, knowing that the town has granted the right of use of town roads to some citizens before.
So I think the best thing is
Follow
we'll
up
follow
with
up
that.
with Reza directly, but there is some news on that. Council's recently made a motion to get the ball rolling, but I think it'd probably be easier if I follow up directly.
Absolutely, yeah, sure.
Is that it, sir?
It is 7 viewers.
7 viewers?
Yeah.
Let's just take a couple of seconds and maybe those 7 people would like to type in a question. Anything?
Mayor, move that we move into closed session.
Okay, thank you. Do we have a seconder for the closed session?
Pardon me, Mayor, sorry, based on MGA 22.2A and 22.2E, contract negotiations and acquisition, sale, lease and security of municipal property.
Great, thank you. And thank you to the people at home who took the time to join us tonight and hear some of the discussions and some of the issues that your council is dealing with. And if you have any questions or comments, and you see a councilor or me on the street, don't hesitate to ask or write to us or call town hall to get yourself on the agenda for the next council